Hi, and welcome back to the AP Music Theory Crash Course series. Today's video is going to be on aural skills, which might just be the hardest part of the AP Music Theory exam. So let's get started. So basically, with the term aural, that just means ear training or the identification of notes and pitches and rhythms and intervals based on what you hear. That includes dictation, melodic, and harmonic, but also sight singing, which is actually not dictation, but when you sing back what you see, and also analysis based on what you hear, and many more things. If you recall what we discussed in the overview video, if you don't, you can always go back to that. You'll remember that we have multiple FRQ questions as part of the AP Music Theory exam. The first two are going to be melodic dictation, where you're going to have to notate the excerpt from a melody that you'll hear played on a single staff. You will have both a treble and a bass clef melodic dictation. Remember that there are two, and one of them will be in major, the other will be in minor, one of them will be in simple, and the other in compound. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with all of those. So some skills required to excel in melodic dictation are the ability to recognize the pitches relative to the tonal center. So with that, it's really helpful if you happen to have perfect pitch, also known as absolute pitch, or even relative pitch, which is where you can kind of identify a note based on a note already given to you that is identified for you. Even if you don't have those, it is totally all right. As long as you practice enough, you'll be able to kind of learn how to find the note anyway based on comparing it to the tonal center, or usually the tonic, the first note you hear. Another skill that's kind of required is that of audiation, or the ability to remember the melody for a little bit and replay it in your head. Because believe it or not, the melodic dictation, actually both dictations, they go by really quickly. So most of the time, it'll be over before you have the chance to write down more than a measure or two. So it is absolutely crucial that you're able to at least remember part of what you heard so that you're able to jot it down in time. Yeah, that's something that you can get better at through practicing. So I made a checklist for you in terms of what to look for when you're doing melodic dictation. First of all, you want to, of course, look at the key signature and the time signature. Both of those are really important so that you are able to familiarize yourself with the context of the excerpt before you hear it. You want to also map out the possible rhythm menus in your head. For example, if it's in 6/8 time, you want to be on the lookout for like triplets of eighth notes, since those are pretty common. The melody will also be played 3 times, so you definitely want to like pace yourself. You want to make sure you get through at least a couple of measures in each playing, because after that, if you don't finish it, then you're going to lose points because you're not going to be able to hear it again. So let's do a quick exercise for melodic dictation right now. Here you have the first measure already written for you, and your job is to see if you can fill out the rest. Feel free to take a screenshot right here or just copy this down on staff paper that you have and follow along with what I'm about to play. Ready? Let's go. All right, so that was the first playing. Just out of time concerns, I'm not going to play it for you 3 times right here. If you're watching this later, of course, you might want to rewind it 2 more times just so you can emulate what it's going to be like when you take the exam. So after 3 times, you should be able to have the rest of the melody notated. If you don't worry. It's a whole process that you'll be able to get better at through practice. So if you're done with rewinding and everything, I'm going to be moving on and showing you the answer key right now. So let's take a look. This is what the full notated melody looks like. If you got a few notes wrong, don't worry about it. You might want to like see why that is, do this dictation a couple more times and see if maybe singing the key in your head first helps a little bit, or try out different strategies that help you. It differs from person to person. Like personally for me, I happen to have absolute pitch, so this part isn't too difficult for me. All right, let's move on to harmonic dictation. This is considered by many people to be the hardest part of the entire test, seeing as there are just so many aspects that you have to notate, and it's really hard to tell sometimes. So with harmonic dictation, like we mentioned in the overview video, it's somewhat similar to the melodic dictation in that you'll be played a melody which you'll have to jot down. For this though, you're only gonna have chords between 6 and 8 of them specifically. And this one will be played 4 times since it's significantly harder. And you'll have to notate it on a grand staff, which means you have both treble and bass, since you're going to need to be notating the soprano and the bass out of the 4-part voice harmony. So there are a variety of techniques and strategies that can be used to facilitate your experience with harmonic dictation. Um, Personally, what works for me really well is just to listen to the soprano and the bass on separate playings because, well, for the soprano, it tends to stand out since the highest note is usually always the brightest. So if you really just focus on the top note, the top line of the voice harmony, you might be able to hear it and write that down first. And also the bass. The bass is really crucial for this because not only do you need the notes for harmonic dictation, but you also need to write down the Roman numerals and the inversions. So you can determine all of that through the bass. Actually, scratch what I said before. You might want to listen to the bass the first time around and the soprano later, since the bass is significantly more important. Well, for the bass, if you're just trying to hear it individually, it should also be relatively easy if you've practiced, since as the lowest note, it's also bound to stand out a little bit. Like I mentioned before, you must also notate the inversions and cadences in harmonic dictation, as well as secondary harmony, which we will discuss in later videos. It's a slightly confusing concept if you're new to this, but practicing will definitely help. You'll also have to recognize the chord qualities, the inversions, like I mentioned. Don't know why I wrote that twice. And recognizing melodic patterns really helps here. Remember how in the last video we discussed the idea of harmonic function, where you have the tonic and then the predominant, the dominant, and back to the tonic? This really applies in the world of harmonic dictation. It helps you a lot if you can narrow down what each chord can be in terms of tonic, predominant, or dominant. Um, so here we also tackle the idea of tonic prolongation, which we kind of just skipped over last time around. Basically, that's just 4 ways that first and second inversion harmonies are used. Passing harmonies are when the bass line uses a passing tone, which is kind of just connecting to two notes by a note in the middle. Like for example, if you have a 1 and a 3 in the bass, the passing tone would be the 2, like do, re, mi. Not really sure if you guys are familiar with solfege, but I'll also go over that a little bit later. Neighbor harmonies are when there's a neighbor tone in the upper voice. A neighbor tone is kind of like when you have two of the same note, but in between that you have a note that's one note higher. Except in this case, it's the upper note of the chord. And a pedal in the bass just means that you're holding the same note. Like, let's say you have three one chords, that would be a pedal in the bass. Arpeggiated harmonies are when the bass is like split into, let's say, 1 3 5. Essentially, it's just arpeggiated. I think you guys should know what arpeggios are. It's just splitting a chord into one by one. And the last one, cadential harmonies, that's when the bass follows cadential patterns. Like, for example, 5 5 1, because you know that you have your authentic cadences that always end on one. And these actually really help you in that sometimes when you can't really tell what the last few chords are in the harmonic dictation, you can always rely on using cadences to figure them out, since there are only so many possibilities for what's most commonly used for cadences. Like I mentioned before, knowing the bass line is immensely helpful in helping you determine everything else, not just inversions and the chords itself, but really everything. Oh yeah, remember that retrogression does not occur in harmonic progression. So if you see in what you're writing down, you have like dominant harmonies moving to subdominant harmonies, you know there's something wrong and you're gonna have to change it the next time it's played. I've put this graphic here again for reference as to what dominant and subdominant harmonies are. You might want to remember these though, just because they are very important. So if you hear a 5 going to a 4, for instance, that's a retrogression, and that definitely should not be happening in a harmonic progression. So if you have that written down, then know that you're probably a little off in your notation. The big changes in harmonic function, like let's say from tonic to uh, predominant, those usually happen on the stronger beats of the measure. I also forgot to mention this before, but harmonic dictation is only going to be in simple time. So you could have 2 4 or 4 4, I guess. And the big changes are going to happen on the stronger beats. So if you're in 4 4, that would be on beats 1 and 3. As for tips for listening and orally getting the notes down, I think I mentioned this a little before, but it really helps to listen for the bass and soprano separately, just because it's so much easier to focus on that one line of notes. And you only need the highest and the lowest of the chords. So it's not too mind bogglingly hard. Um, it also helps to kind of remember the pitch of the tonic chord, which is generally played kind of first, like especially when you can't really tell what chord is later on. See if you can remember the two and compare them. And yes, this very important. You want to take advantage of your knowledge of patterns when you can't really tell what the scale degree is for the chord as a whole. Patterns, we'll discuss some of them here, as cadences also matter. Seventh chords are pretty obvious because you can hear the dissonance in them. Like if you hear a 1 3 5 7 chord, that's going to stand out since it sounds like it needs resolving, definitely more than your typical triad. And as for patterns, cadences are a type of pattern that really definitely help. So here you have a chart for implied harmonies and their relation to cadence. For common bass lines, for solfege, I think most of you at least have heard of the concept of like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. This is basically just the equivalent of Roman numerals and scale degrees, but in solfege form. So sol, sol, do here would be the equivalent of 5 5 1, and 5 5 1, that would be 4 5 1, and so on. So this is just saying that if you hear at the end of the excerpt played a 5-5-1, that is obviously going to be an authentic cadence, and the harmony implied is most likely going to be a 1-6-4 to a 5-7 chord to a 1, or these. So you might want to screenshot this chart or take a closer look at it, since this will really help you out in your harmonic dictation. So now let's do another quick practice. Get your staff paper and your pens ready. Uh, let's go. So there you go. Once again, I'm only going to play it once for time's sake. If you're practicing along with it, make sure to rewind it 3 more times as to emulate the testing experience. Once you're done with that, I'm going to scroll down to the answers. So these are the actual chords that were played. Whoops, I think there's one more line, yeah. Bass, tenor, alto, soprano. These are the soprano notes, of course, and the bass notes that you were required to notate. You don't have to worry about the middle notes, since for the AP test, you only have to notate the soprano and the bass. These are the Roman numerals and the inversions that came along with the harmonic dictation. So check your answers and see what you got wrong or right. Remember, practice makes perfect. So if you're looking for more harmonic or melodic dictation practices, YouTube is always a really good resource, since some people post harmonic or melodic dictation practices that you can follow along with and study with. They are pretty good resources, so take advantage of them. So next, moving on to multiple choice questions. You're also going to have a lot of oral stuff in multiple choice questions in part A, like we mentioned in the overview. This is actually kind of also confusing, not because it's hard, but just because it's kind of hard to remember, since they tend to play like these really long excerpts and you don't always get to look at the score along with it. So with those, you will often have to identify scales, modes, intervals, chord qualities, and rhythm. And there will also be a section where you have to detect errors from excerpts. For these, you will get the score of the excerpt, but what they play won't entirely be matching with what you see as music notated on the paper. And it's not really as obvious as you might think, since they really just alter the minor things, such as like adding a dot where there shouldn't be a dot for the rhythm, or like changing the pitch to another one that makes sense diatonically. So you got to really pay attention to those. I would suggest for error detection, just like I mentioned for harmonic dictation, you want to split up listening to the soprano and the bass. I mean, well, in case it's not a 4-part voice harmony, sometimes it's like just I think a piano harmony melody. Yeah, you want to listen to the different parts separately so that you can tell more easily when there's something wrong. Just write it down instantly, and they're multiple choice, so always circle your answer right away. You will also have to recognize your meter and rhythms, your tonal center and key, cadences, and NCTs are non-chord tones. I will elaborate on these more in future videos, but they're sort of similar to what I mentioned before in passing and neighboring tones and such, except not for chords well, yes for chords, but also for like tones more specifically. I'll elaborate on these in future videos, like I mentioned. You'll also need to note performance considerations like changes in timbre, which remember is which instrument sounds are being played, and dynamics, articulation, tempo, and style. I'm not gonna lie, this part is kind of annoying because usually when they ask you questions about these, it's when there are two parts or phrases to an excerpt. And sometimes it's really hard to remember like the differences between the two, especially since by the time the recording gets to the second section, you've already forgotten what was played in the first section. So that you kind of just got to take note. You can jot down some details like what you hear. If there's a violin playing in the first section, then you might want to write that down. Like if the second section turns into like flute or something instead, that would be the more obvious thing that you'd be able to do for timbre. Dynamics are more subtle, but it should be noticeable enough for you to get the answer right, because College Board needs some people to pass the test at least. Um, Harmonic progression also. You'll also have multiple choice based on those. So make sure to jot down notes, like I mentioned, as you hear the recording, and relationship of key centers. So the last thing we're going to discuss for today is sight singing. This is the last part of the free response questions. You will have two of those. And once again, one of them is going to be in treble clef, one in bass, one in major, one in minor, one in simple, and one in compound. So you need to be familiar with all of these. And as you recall, you will have 75 seconds to practice it before you record. So what you'll need to do is reproduce the melody while maintaining tonal center, or in other words, you want to try not to go off key. This is going to be a little hard if you are what they consider tone deaf, or if you can't really tell if you're still in the right key as you sing. So this is something that you also need to experiment with yourself, record yourself, and listen to it, see if it sounds right. um Once you've practiced enough, or like if you're naturally perfect pitch or relative pitch, that should be somewhat easier for you. This is a pretty important note, but you have the option to sing in any syllable. If you're very familiar with solfege, like do re mi fa sol la ti do, which I've included a diagram of for here, then you can use that. I mean, according to the textbook, most people use solfege, but honestly, I don't recommend it simply because there are so many added things to think about. Like when you see accidentals, you also have to adjust the solfege based on it. Like honestly, I didn't even know about these until like this year. The fact that if you have a sharp on top of a re, that makes it a re. Like there's just so many things to think about. So unless you've been taught to think in solfege for like your entire music career, I would not recommend it. You can just sing like la for everything, or da or di or do for everything. Whatever is easiest for you, that's what's important. You won't get any points off if you don't use solfege. So you want to also familiarize yourself with the differences in pitches for each minor scale, as they might have harmonic minor, melodic minor, natural minor. You want to be able to sing what's most accurate according to what you have to sing. Yeah, overall, you want to just practice like your pitch awareness. Like if you hear melodies on a regular basis, you might want to practice trying to sing them back after you hear them, just to improve your sense of pitch and your general intonation accuracy, since that's kind of what you're being graded on. And here is another checklist of sorts that really helps me when I do sight singing as a whole. Feel free to go through these steps one by one as you do them. So first, when you get a sight singing, it's just gonna look like an excerpt of music, single staff, obviously. So first, you want to look at the clef, make sure you're singing in the right clef, obviously, and then the time and the key signatures. The time signature is pretty important since your entire rhythmic sense is going to be based on that. You want to identify the key, whether it's major or minor, since that's going to be pretty impactful for your um, the latter parts of your side singing. And you want to practice singing the scale in your head first, since that really helps you familiarize the entire context for which you're going to be singing the melody. Oh yeah, another note, you will be given the starting pitch, the pitch of the first note for your sight singing melodies, but know that you don't actually have to use the written key, especially if it doesn't really match with your vocal range. Like you don't want to have to strain yourself or like go severely off key just to match with the given key. So feel free to adjust it lower or higher to a pitch that works for you, that fits in your entire vocal range, since accuracy is what you're going to be graded on. You also want to, before you do it, you want to tap out the rhythm, since that's also an important aspect of sight singing. You want to maybe clap it or tap it with your foot, familiarize yourself with it. And make sure when you sing later that you hold the notes to their full value. If it's a half note, don't just sing it for a dotted quarter note's length. You want to hold it for the entire thing. And make sure you don't rush, because then the grader might interpret what you sang for a different note value, which you're going to get points off on, and you don't want that. And since you get 75 seconds for practice before you record, you want to take full advantage of those 75 seconds. Practice as many times as you possibly can. It will help. And when you actually record, don't stop, because you're not going to get a chance to start over. Don't hesitate, just move on, be confident, and make the best of it. When you're practicing, of course, you want to try to emulate the conditions of the exam. So whether that's the timing, you only get 75 seconds to practice and 30 seconds to record, or the whole idea of not being able to start over, you want to have that in your practicing as well, just so that you're more used to it when the exam day comes. So that's all for today. I know that the oral unit is a pretty rough one that requires a lot of, hands-on practice. Um, you can always find good resources on YouTube, as I've mentioned. So, best of luck to you, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.